So yes, thank you for attending today's webinar, brought to you through SafeEt's community platform, Fish Tech Connect. My name is Inga. I am the Executive Director here at SafeEt. Welcome to those attending this event live and those who are watching the recording. If you are not part of the live session and have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out through Fish Tech Connect platform event where you can post questions or reach out to Christine directly. And we've gone through how to ask questions, so just put your hand up. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Christine Ward-Paige. She is the CEO and founder of eOceans. Christine is presenting today from Conflict to Collaboration, Revolutionizing Fisheries with Ethical, Transparent and Real-Time Data Science. So I'm going to hand over to Christine now to tell us a bit more about how and why she founded eOceans and share her presentation. So over to you, Christine, and I will now mute.
Thanks, Inga. You can hear me just fine? Great. Okay, so I don't need to convince anyone on this call that fisheries and everyone who works in or on fisheries are essential. We also know that today this sector is undergoing unprecedented challenges on a global and local scales. Some fisheries are undergoing major shifts in management investments to recover previous declines and also seeing some recoveries. As well, others are undergoing pressures from climate change, invasive species, shifting ecosystems, and more. As well, and some places, tensions are growing. And so eOceans was designed to pull together the people, the organizations, the data, and the data analysis in order to make informed decisions for the future. So I'm Christine Ward-Paige, as Inga mentioned, and I am a marine scientist. I worked in fisheries and conch, lobster, turtles, carrying capacity, pollution. I evaluated different marine protected areas and shark sanctuaries and worked on this. And so I also did my PhD for those fisheries scientists in the room. I did my PhD with Ransom Myers, Dr. Ransom Myers, the late Ransom Myers, who was a famous fisheries ecologist. Who was the person who found that cod, really valuable cod, was declining and was going to collapse. And so he was essentially telling the world that that was going to happen. And so when I worked in his lab, there were, I think, 30 of us, 30 PhD and postdoc scientists that were all analyzing the world's fisheries data. So we used to joke that he would double us up if he could. We were all packed in, like just gather the data, pull it together on jellyfish, turtles, tuna, sharks, and rays, and so on. And so it was analyzing all these data. And through my work, I focused on sharks and rays and a lot of crowdsourcing. And so a lot of my work, everywhere I went, I wanted to talk to people. And I was really harnessed in on local knowledge and traditional knowledge and the places that people knew. So as a scientist, I would go in and do a study on a certain species in a certain location, but the people who were there, they knew the sites like the backs of their hands, whether they were fishers or scuba divers. And so I really dug into that. And so when I listened to people, they complained a lot about outdated quotas and bycatch management, poor protected areas. They're put in the wrong place at the wrong time because scientists only had a certain window of data from a certain location. They lacked trust in science and the regulations. They had concerns about illegal fishing and climate change, depredation from sharks. So if we recover sharks, then they start to steal some of their fish, their catches. Other priorities like whales and endangered species, invasive species, pollution, new industries. As the last decade, we've seen new industries coming into the ocean space and the competition for that space, and a growing blue economy. So there's so many different things that are happening in this sector. And to say that it's highly complex and dynamic is really an understatement. So one of the last projects I worked on for the Canadian government was evaluating a time area closure. So this is again tapping into the cod. So these different management strategies have been put in place to protect cod while they're spawning. So this was a time area closure, so sort of a moving marine protected area. And it had been in place since 2006, but it had never been evaluated. Is this being successful? Has it protected cod? Has it reduced bycatch? And so this has, been in place for over a decade, and it took, I think it was nearly $1 million of funding to do this assessment. And again, out of date. And we published this in 2020, and we found that it hadn't been working. So this was, all these years, this management process strategy had been in place, but it hadn't been working for all these years. Why aren't we evaluating things as we put them in place, just the same, as other places? So we need to be moving faster in order to do that. And these delays, as well as that sort of misinformed decisions, is based on the best available knowledge that we have, but it creates declining fisheries, displaced fisheries, misinformation, disinformation, and the synergies that create conflict. So I kept asking, how can we do this better? And so to get started, I started to look at what's the history of how we've been assessing fisheries and doing science, really. And so if you look back at the 80s, it predates me a little bit, not too much, but it does. But it was all done manually. So we could collect a little bit of data and we'd process it manually. In the 90s, yes, very few of us had personal computers. I did not, even in the mid-90s. So I was a scientist. I had an electric typewriter in my room and a very old computer with CD-ROMs, but I had to go to the computer lab at my university to run Excel. So the spreadsheets we were working on were pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Then the early 2000s, that's when I started working with RAM. The mid 2000s and early 2000s, we were using clusters to process data. So pull the data together. And then we started to get personal computers that could process and run GIS, R, SAS, QGIS, MATLAB, Word, and all these things that could make us better. And we could put more data in together and we could process it better. But still, if you look down to the right, our publications, whether it's reports or peer-reviewed publications, although they're now digital, they still come out years after we ask the question. The amount of time between data collection and actually having a report or a publication, and then we start to distribute it. It's out of date by the time it's published and it never updates. And then we try to distribute that information through these various social media channels, which have arguably become a little bit more challenging and less professional, or challenging to communicate professionally on. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say there. So, and also, so years out of date costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and limited data. So we're answering one question at a time. And so digging a little further, we look at the process of data collection to the publication. So if we think of fisheries, there's lots of data that's really just not collected. So that's like if we think of IUU or illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, there's a lot of just catch that's just not reported. Often because there's nowhere to report it to. So you go out and you catch fish and there's nowhere to report it, and so it goes unreported. But then the next phase is there's actually reporting. So you're collecting data. This can be in pencil on paper, and you're recording your catch, your bycatch, and then you mail it into somebody who then sends it to somebody else who digitizes it, or whether you're an observer or a fisher or whatever. And then the data gets digitized and then sent back to the fisheries scientist who then analyzes it. Or in some cases, they're using e-logs today, where data is being digitized right away, but it's still being sent directly to a scientist that needs to analyze it. And so often it sits in these spreadsheets. So a databases access, Microsoft Access, or whatever it's databases, or computers, even hard drives, or cloud systems where the data sits until a scientist like me, a data scientist like me, comes along and pulls it together and does the analysis. And a lot of that time is spent cleaning, QA/QCing, making the data interoperable. Then we write lines of R code, typically the same code for one species in one location and another species in another location. Then we're making maps and graphs, and then we're generating a report. And so this is just an example from my neighborhood in Atlantic Canada, a very important species, an endangered species, Atlantic salmon, that has suffered major declines. published in 2021, but the last data point was 2015. So that's 6 years out of date for this progress. How can we ever make smart decisions? As well, if we just think about, I don't know how much time was spent on this. There's no actual author listed on it. But if we think of 8 months, it's pretty typical for even a small to medium-sized data analysis. So it's really expensive. And when we think of the fisheries and marine protected areas and management strategies all around the world, most of them don't have the capacity, the technical capacity, but also the financial capacity to run these analysis and to keep up. So these workflows really cannot meet the needs of today's challenges. So just to think of an analogy, if we look at any warehouse or box store, we can look online and see how many of any screws that they have online that day. And so you can go buy 3 screws or 5 screws or whatever it is. So they're doing inventories all the time and communicating that with people. And versus in fisheries or other places, it can be years out of date. So we need workflows that really meet the needs of today's challenges, where we're processing data as quickly as we're collecting it, so that we can generate a report like this that's up to date with data up to today. So it's fast, and then there's no cherry picking. So we've worked with fisheries that have hired us to analyze their data because they didn't trust the data scientist that was hired to do it. So they ask us to analyze it because they're afraid that the scientists have cherry picked the data or cherry picked the results to match their biases. And so we need to get over that part too. So eOceans was built to help you, your organization, your fishery, and your ecosystem to thrive. It's really a new era of data science that's fast, credible, scalable, collaborative, and for everyone. Again, I'll just show that. So this is the past, and then today it's data coming in and being analyzed. So this is just a report of a table showing all the parts. Every project really needs data quality, data quantity, data management, interoperability, summary analysis, advanced analysis, maps, graphs, displays, and a report. And each one of those parts currently requires different softwares and different amounts of time and efforts to get to where you need to go. And so eOceans puts all that functionality into one place. It's built by PhD data scientists, made in Canada, using research grade ethics built in. So we've seen some apps that are either keeping the data and just funneling it to the regulator, or making it open access, or putting an embargo and then an open access. And we found that a lot of these have flaws, which I could get into in a total different call. There could be a whole call on that. But we've built research grade ethics built in, which includes self-determination, data democracy. We don't sell data, it's your data and you're deciding who has access to it, and no open access, and it's your data, your choice. So in a nutshell, you put the data in. This can come through a mobile application, through your CSVs, so if you have existing data, or through an API. So if you have a stream of data coming in, you put it into eOceans and it automatically streams it to your projects and generates and updates your analyses on the go. And the data, so if you're interested in a mackerel fishery, for example, you would not only get your analysis for that mackerel fishery, or salmon fishery, whatever example I've provided there. But the data, so imagine if your catch is mackerel and you're tracking mackerel, but your bycatch could be of turtles, it could be of invasive species and other things. So that data can then be streamed and repurposed instantly for all these other purposes. So now we're able to collaborate across disciplines, across projects, across interests, and so on. So you put your data in, you see your results, and then you're able to make informed decisions and actions. And those can be regarding purchasing, quotas, conservation, management, new opportunities, or investments, and more. So focusing on ending UU fishing would be a great purpose for using this as just one example. So yeah, so that both of these kinds of papers can be up to date with information up to today, so that we can have timely quotas and bycatch management, smart protected areas, trust in science and regulations, and UU fishing. I say the I because the I is a little bit more tricky. It's not so collaborative, but if we can tackle UU, then we can, other organizations that are well known are working on the I part, the illegal part. So understanding climate change, understanding depredation, mammal priorities, invasive species, pollution, new industries, and blue economy, and so on. And there's room for other players to play. So if you think of all the, I'm part of different ecosystems that are in the blue economy, fisheries, and so on. And there's many different amazing technologies that are coming to the forefront that are, helping to improve the fisheries on the data side. So collecting more cleaner data, and making it easier to generate that data, but they're still all siloed, and they're different fragments of the data. So if we all can put all that data together and have it analyzed and interoperable in a real-time way, then our models can be more holistic and multivariate. So that we can all start to build that collaboration and network together. And one other thing, so this is sort of the cherry on top, is what I call it, is the Smart Fishery and Tracker and the Smart Fishery Score. So these are algorithms that we have built and are working on that essentially looks at building a dynamic fisheries score. So if you think of, if you're targeting lobster, if you're going out and targeting lobster, then if you go out and you catch lobster and you keep that lobster. So if you discard that lobster because they're too small or they're buried or for whatever reason they're not right to keep, your score kind of goes down. So then and then if your bycatch goes up, your score goes down, and different things like that. So the more precise your fishery is, the better your score is going to be. And that makes it super easy getting that one score that's dynamic and updating, not just a static thing that lives, on a package. It becomes this updating and dynamic score that can be as fine a resolution as you want or as big a resolution as you want. So it could be the year, it could be to the week. So you can very clearly see which fisheries are getting that high or low score. So how to get started with a fishery. So if you want to get your fishery started, step one is you're going to define your fishery or your project. It takes about an hour, or it takes me about 10 minutes. It might take you, if it's your first time, to think about it, but it takes about an hour to get a project started. So when you're starting a project, you're going to put in your a geofence that defines your area of interest. This could be something arbitrary like the Bay of Fundy. Maybe not arbitrary, but the Bay of Fundy, it could be the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, or it could be a fisheries management zone, or a marine protected area. It could be very fine. You can make it as explicit and clear as you want, and you can have multiple ones and then have one that overtops it, that sort of unites them together. But essentially, you're saying, which coordinates of the world am I interested in? Then the second part is, which variables am I interested in? If you're interested only in tuna, then you would only add tuna as your variable. But if you want tuna with all the other species, with fads, with ghost nets, with all these other things, you can put in whatever variables you want. It can be super fine, even to the point of tuna that are spawning, and you can have like only data that's tuna, whatever it is. So, you're putting in your variables, and then you're choosing your analyses. And we have lots of built-in analyses, or you can add your own. So setting up a project looks something like this. You're filling out a form. It's pretty easy form to fill out. You've got project name, you up your logo, your banner image, your organization information. The project scope is which methodologies are you using to collect data, and then which variables are you reporting on, and then the boundaries. So your upload a geofence that describes your boundaries. And that's about it. And then once you've uploaded that, it looks like this in the dashboard. So this would be your dashboard. Here I'm logged in, and over here you'd click on Teams, and then you'd see your project here and your logo and your project. And across here, all these different tabs down here where it says location, description, observations, those are all different tabs that are associated with your project. So you can see all the data, you can see the results, you can discuss the results, and there's a co-interpretation channel or a comments channel where your team can be discussing the results in private before, declaring what the actual trends are. So that's really good if you're working with First Nations, with Indigenous communities, with local knowledge holders, that you can share discussing that information privately. And on the right, you'll see the black line. So I just want to bring it home that when you're out logging, you can, when you're logging data, the coordinates that match the inside of that polygon are the ones that come into your data, into your project. Ones outside don't. So that way, as somebody's moving across the ocean, there can be many overlapping barriers like marine protected areas, fisheries management zones, research projects, and so on that can all be overlapping. And as you go and log, if you've joined all these different projects, it will automatically look at the location and share. So over here, it would only share to one project. As you go along here, maybe it's sharing to 4 projects, over here 1, and then none. So you're kind of like, it's automatically going to those projects, and then the researchers or the principal investigators that end see the results and see the data and can QA/QC it on the fly. Step 2, adding the data. So the data can come in through the mobile application, which is using the date and location and time of your phone. It can be uploaded because we have 50 years plus 150 years of data. If you already have data in a spreadsheet, you can upload that to your project, so we're not wasting that data. And then if you have a sensor, you can bring in that kind of information. So now you can really look at it in a holistic way. If you want to bring in temperature, with fisheries catch, with whale populations, all those things, you can, interact. I think there's over 1 billion variable combinations that you can choose currently. And so the data comes in, and then, yeah, your results get updated and your reports. And if you have data downloads enabled, you can even download the data, and it's nice, clean, interoperable. Everyone around the world has the same formats for dates and times and all that stuff. And then we can move much faster. And again, it streams to all those different projects to keep them all up to date. And things you can track are the human side, so the project administrators, the data collectors, the followers and stakeholders. So imagine if the tuna fishery had a whole bunch of people, the buyers, the consumers, everyone's like interested in tuna, and people could be following those. Versus, we have eels in our lakes here. If you have a lake project, maybe fewer people would be following the eels in Nova Scotia's lakes, but they could. And then there's the metrics, so the presence, absence, occurrence, relative abundance. I have a screen in front of my screen there, richness, evenness, etc. So these are sort of the basic, but you can track any other things too, as well as the trends through space and through time. So this can be used by the fishers, can be used by fisheries observers, dockside monitors, scientists, guardians, rangers, citizen scientists, whale scientists, invasive species scientists, plastic pollution trackers, and so on. So, like I said, any fishery, any location, any gear, instantly analyzed. There's no need for the code and the complexity of cleaning and doing the data wrangling. Gives more detailed, higher resolution information, and at 80% of the cost reduction. So this enables us to increase trust, increase collaborations, and reduce conflict. And our one quote is, eOceans offers invaluable tools that we use for collaboration and seamless data collection to analysis, enabling unprecedented collaboration and insights. So today we're asking for leaders of fisheries to sign up, book a meeting with us to get your fisheries signed up today and start showing how this new data science era can help with fisheries. Thank you. And if there is interest, we can go in, interest in time, we can always dig into the platform, but I didn't want to count on sharing screens and doing all that back and forth. So thanks, Inga.
Thank you, Christine. That was fantastic. Can you hear me properly? You can hear me? Good, cool. Okay, that was amazing. I think that I love gathering data, and I think the trends, the metrics, the scale of the solution, and who can use that, and the benefits are outstanding. So thank you for that. That was really informative. As always, I have some questions. But I would like people to take part and ask questions. So if you have any feedback, questions about the presentation, now's the time to pop them in the Q&A. But I'll go ahead whilst everyone's absorbing and having to think about that, or you can raise your hand. So please do ask questions, ideas, feedback, etc. So for me, I'll start on the basics. Is it a monthly subscription, and can people have multiple users? How does that sort of work?
Yeah, so that's so previously, without it, people would hire us to analyze data, and to me, that was very expensive. And they would only do it once, every 3 years or once every 2 years, or they're trying to hire people to analyze their data in-house or outsource it to a consulting company. And so in either way, those are very expensive and very hard, because if you give me really messy data, it costs a lot more. If you give me nice, clean data, then I can get it done much faster. So yeah, it's a monthly subscription now instead of just a one-off data analysis. It's a monthly subscription, and it depends on what level of analytics you want. So if you want basic analytics and you're a not-for-profit and you've got 5 people logging, I think it starts at $79 a month. So like that's less than an hour and a half of my time I can't do much for an hour and a half of time. So if it's just cleaning your getting clean data, and then you can add on, of course, if more data and more complex analyses can be added on to that.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question that come in, which was actually, I was going to ask this one next. So thank you very much for the person who's asked this. So can you share maybe a case study or a story about a place, a fishery where this tool has been implemented? Also, has this tool been used in many SSF contexts? So yeah, if you can answer that 2 part.
So no, the short answer is no. We are in the fisheries context, no, not yet. So I have analyzed data for a lobster fishery, for example, and we wrote that code, and now that analysis is embedded in the back end. But our our testing has all been done over the last year in California, in the Maldives, and South Africa, focused on mostly on the making sure the data goes where it needs to go. We didn't want to touch anything that's compliance related until we made sure that the data flow was processed properly. So we have a group in the Maldives that's studying marine megafauna, so sharks, rays, turtles, and I can share a case study on that. And we have another one in California looking at marine protected areas, so who's around the biodiversity, who's using the marine protected area, and so on. So, but in those cases, so in the marine protected area in California, what they did is they went to OBIS, which is the ocean bio. Oh, shoot. OBIS is where the biodiversity data, oceans biodiversity data lives. It's like a data warehouse where you can pull it. So they went to there and found all the data that's from their marine protected area. This is off La Jolla, California, right off Scripps. So lots of scientists live there, but they only found 120 data points in that warehouse of data. And it's mostly birds and mammals. Now with the mobile app, they're able to collect that amount of data just like in one outing. And so if I did go over to the dashboard, you can just see, like, you can barely see the OBIS data versus the data that's collected with the mobile app. Now they're getting not only biodiversity data, but the social data, who's using the marine protected area, what are the values and what are the threats. So it's not just that's the other thing, is to think like there's so many apps that are for plastic pollution, for ghost nets, for biodiversity, for living biodiversity only. But what about the ones that you're catching and keeping and so on? So that's, yeah, so we're looking for those first sort of 50 fisheries right now to get signed up and go through and be that next, the testers for that. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, and is there any you mentioned sort of Maldives, etc. Is there any geographical preference on those 50 on the areas, or is there
Yeah, ideally, Ideally, they're spread. In some ways, ideally, they're spread because then we're getting a better picture of all the different contexts. If it's in different types of gear, if it's in, yeah, so that's the sort of idea, is that you can get different locations, different gears, different target species, and just trying to figure out so that we can keep tweaking it to make it
Yeah.
more efficient and more fluent for each of these different types of fisheries. You know, it's not to say we don't want 20 different salmon fisheries. I think of like salmon on the west coast of the US and Canada, every river could have a salmon fishery, have a salmon team. And then there could be one that groups them all together, and then another one for the entire distribution of salmon. And so that would be, now everyone's just working in their silos still, but also working together. And that's when I think you can really get that power of collaboration.
Yeah, yeah. And so that leads into another question we have. To what degree could citizen scientists use the platform to coordinate efforts to document their local environment?
Yeah, so that's a great question because that is where I came from. My PhD was really on looking at sharks and rays on a global scale, using citizen science observations. So and it does tie in greatly to fisheries. So, for example, people love manta rays, big manta rays, right? And so alarms started to ring when they started to disappear in the places where there's tourism for them. And so I crowdsourced data from ocean explorers around the world, so 600,000 observations in 90 regions of the world, and found that people were reporting. So only 2 countries reported catching manta rays to FAO. So when you catch, you're supposed to report your catch to FAO, but only 2 countries reported catching them. And people were saying they were seeing manta rays being caught and sold in markets around the world. And this was even being documented in the scientific literature. So that discrepancy helped them get onto the endangered species list and then get them international protection. So that, like, this absolutely citizen science, whether you're going through a market and documenting who's catching what and landings, all those sorts of things can
Yeah.
be documented.
Yeah. And I'd be interested if we have anyone on today who can think about how they could use eOceans tools with their work they're doing. So I'll let that if anyone's got a question around that or how the solution can grow and scale that may be relevant to some of our callers today, that would be good. I think the other thing for me is I see a lot of technology. There's the technology there and there's potential users, but I think one of the things is the gathering of data. Who needs it? When do they need it? Why do they need it? What does it need to look like? And I think above all this, it needs to be easy in order and accessible for all. In order for people to adopt and implement, they have to know who needs it and when and where does that data go. And I think that's one of the key parts, because there's so much data, so much technology and solutions that we see that are wonderful, but it's getting those, from those pilots to implementation and really getting data and impact there. I have another question.
So to
Sorry,
add,
Karen.
can I add to that, yeah, and there's lots of technology that's generating data. There's lots of data too. So like there's different phone hotlines. Every day I see, a phone hotline if you see this bird or that you see a whale that's stranded or you see, and so all that data gets collected in different ways in different silos. The problem is making use of it so that, and not
Yeah,
only, and then there's the mistrust. So when it goes into a black hole, when people call because they saw a basking shark and they call somebody and there's no response, that means that next time, should they just not call? Maybe nobody cares. And so, okay, well, now if we report and we can actually see that it went somewhere, was analyzed, and an action was made from it, then we're more empowered to be working together rather than just, oh, I don't think anyone cares about this.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and there's the tool there, and I think everyone plays a part in that. I think also your early approach from the research and understanding sort of different areas and what their needs are, and listening to the people that work or within that environment daily is really key to technology solutions being being useful and being able to do what they need to do, because there's lots of technology and that can be there, but is it useful? How can it be used? And how can and people see the benefits of that? And so I think it's really key to sort of understand the landscape and have that background there that's research. If any, oh, we've got, let me just check on our questions. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. I don't know if we have any more questions coming through. I was going to ask also about, you mentioned about the past historical data. It would be interesting to hear more about that and how that's brought in. Yeah, if you could just recap on that part.
Yeah, that's great. So one part of my PhD back in 2010 was to look at shark populations. So we were looking at shark populations today, but to say, okay, well, they've declined in the last 10 years, but what were they in the past? So like looking through historical narratives, old fisheries logs, and digitizing those. But then how do you add those into a system like this? How do you, or you have already existing like lots of CSV files. And so you want to add those because today is only a tiny picture. Like if we go out and collect our catch and bycatch data today, that's only a tiny picture. How does that compare to the past? So once we put in that past data, you can look at cod, because I use that example, but cod is down here. If we put in data that dates back from the 70s or even earlier, we can see it go down. Now, because we're part of that chain of data and we can see it, we trust it more because it's not just a static piece of, a trend line in a report. It's an actual moving part. And we meaning if we were fishers who are contributing to that trend line, we can buy into it more because we've been part of collecting that data and we add trust to it instead of, oh, those scientists, they just come down for 2 weeks of the year and they collect their data and then they go away and write a report. They don't know that what we saw. Like I've seen fishers here in my neighborhood, because of climate change, they're saying all these new species are coming into our neighborhood or into our neighborhood. And they want to know if any of them are worth exploiting or investigating at least, but nobody's collecting those data or looking at them because it's not on anyone's file. And so if it's not on anyone's file, then it's never going to get investigated. And everyone's already spread too thin to start looking at those data. So yeah, so once you upload the data, then you've already trusted them. The idea is that you've already trusted them. Then you have the data and you're essentially mapping it. So you're saying latitude, longitude, date, and time, if you have it. And then this is the species and this is the number. And then we match it to our own, we essentially merge the data sets together. And so that you can now, that's the idea, is that if you have data, past data, you put that in. And then once you have a project going, then you use the mobile app. So now you're updating it with more quickly.
Yeah, yeah. And so the other questions I've got, I think, have we got any? No, we've got no more questions right now. If anyone has any questions, now's the time to ask. The other thing that I was going to ask is when you talk about partners, and is there other technologies that are out there right now that you can think of that complement and could advance yours or could knit in and really be helpful? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so many. Because so if we think of most of the technologies I'm aware of focus on the data collection piece, whether it's temperature, electronic monitoring, e-logs, all these sort of like focused on even some of them that have AI where you take a photo of your catch, like if you caught a fish, even recreational fishing. So there's so much technology and innovation happening on the data collection piece, and each one of them building their own sort of dashboard and stuff doesn't really make a lot of sense because it's just a narrow piece of the puzzle. And so you could, I mean, yeah, you could, but it'd be faster to stitch it in together and use the eOceans dashboard, because then you can funnel that data to your customer much faster instead of building your own. We're the data scientists that would do something with it. So a lot of them, I talk to them and they're like, yeah, we're doing this great thing and it's an amazing thing, but their customer is the scientist. And so there's still, that scientist still has to go and analyze that data to make sense, turn it into data products. So with eOceans, we can turn it into data products for you and for your customer, and across disciplines and across data sources and types. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's not always thought about, is how you receive that clean data, and how that person then needs to amend that, or the resource that needs to be put into that to change it into the format that is useful. And definitely in my previous roles, that's something that, that kind of rears its head when you're so far along and you have these solutions, and then you think about the process and you're like, okay, how do people need to receive this data? Um, so I'm guessing right now, you're looking for partners, you're looking for projects, for pilot projects, you're looking to link in with people who want to make those smart decisions like yourselves, and work to scale. What does eOceans look like in a year, 2 years, when we start to approach 2030? What does eOceans look like to you?
yeah, I think if I take an example just from my own neighborhood, where we have lobster fisheries, we have salmon fisheries, we have snow crab, we have North Atlantic right whales are huge for all of those fisheries, where they're coming through, and everyone's sort of trying to work on their own solution, one for lobster, one for haddock, one for cod, all these different siloed solutions. If everyone has their own projects and they're working together in near real time, with the whale watchers, with not separate from, it's all integrated. Then you have sort of like one global node. And the way that we've designed it is we have the ocean ledger, which I didn't show. But as you add data, if you choose to, you can contribute to the ocean ledger. And that is essentially a map of what the global biodiversity is in the ocean. So we have that's the ocean ledger. So if there's 374 North Atlantic right whales left and one dies, then it can very quickly adapt with all the different data sets. So depending on, no matter where in the world you are, you're running a project and they're all working. Same with humpback whales, same with cod, same with tuna. So imagine, yeah, that's the sort of goal, is that everyone ideally is feeding into that ledger. So we know that status. Then we can start to send goals. So we want to
Hmm.
recover these different species and we want to set goals. We don't just set a moratorium. I've seen, we set a moratorium with no explicit goal of when that moratorium will be released. The Goliath grouper in Florida was another one. And then there's conversation, oh, there's more left. Well, until they've reached a certain density or a certain population abundance, the moratorium stays until we've reached then we can have another conversation. But putting in without specific goals, like business, in the business world, you follow the lean startup method where you set goals and you work and you agilely, if that's the right word, move towards those goals. And I think we need to do that in science, and we need to do that in conservation and fisheries management and so on.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. And I think from a technology perspective, as you know, seeing lots of different technologies and some wonderful examples of what's happening, projects around the world. That's something that SafeET are looking to do, is provide that global map that shows what technology is where, how it's being used, so we can replicate those wonderful examples, but also so we can pause, think about where we are halfway through the ocean decade, and think, right, where do we need to focus? What are our goals? What are our realistic objectives moving forwards? Because there are quite siloed efforts, and we know we can have more impact. So I guess for eOceans, it's like that global plug-in for people to plug in and provide that data so that we have that. So we don't have any more questions. So I will wrap up soon, but if anyone does have any thoughts or just wants to add something into the conversation, then please do now. Just pop up your hand. What I will say, Christine, it'd be great if you could share the case studies through the platform that you have, or share, and also share maybe if you do have a link to the Ocean Ledger. Um, we will share this presentation and the recording today through Fish Tech Connect. We will also share your contact details so that people can get in touch when they're sat there tonight or tomorrow and think of a question. They can come to you and ask. Oh, I'm seeing the ledger here, so let's have a look at that.
If I can figure out how to do that. Yep. So here's
Perfect.
the Ocean Ledger. So essentially all the data that feeds in, you can see it all here, and you'll be tracking it through time and all the species here. And then, yeah, so over here you click on any of the projects. I can go to one that I mentioned. It might take a second there. And then here's all your links. So all the tabs I mentioned with the data contributors and so on. And then you click on results, and here's your results, and you can click intermediate results and you'll see heat maps. So important to note here is that we don't give away the exact location of species or places. And that is so important when you're working with fishers, because they don't want to give away the exact location of where they're fishing. So but we can jitter them so that it's obfuscated essentially. But then you can see, so for this example, all your tables, trends, I don't know what I clicked on. I can go back to basic here, and you can get your species, social values. You can click on the mobile app versus uploaded data sets versus all data sets, so you can stitch them all together. And this is like, so imagine this was your catch and your bycatch. You could click on any one of it and you could see all the species that are being caught by any fishery. So if it was lobster, it would be great if it was just all lobster, right? If there was no bycatch. And so this is how you can you track all these things. This is what I mentioned earlier, where this is the data collected with the mobile app versus you can't even see it with OBIS, the other data sets. But yeah, so that's, I hope that's in,
Yeah,
adds
that's
some context.
fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, that adds context. And if there is just some visuals from that, some sort of
Yeah.
snips or something, we can share that. I think that would be really good. And
Yeah.
tell me, just remind me, when did you find, when was the company founded, eOceans? When did you
eOceans,
start?
yeah, so eOceans I started in 2013 when I was on my first maternity leave. I had like this idea. I was like, I want to bring people together from more of a citizen science perspective. Then in 2018 is when I left. I was working for government and I left to build this because I had had this idea and I just kept reinventing the wheel over and over again, analyzing data for one question at a time. And the same time, our oceans are changing so fast and
Mhm.
not being able to keep up, I thought this has to change. So I left and started to build and built this. So
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I love to see a collection of data and visuals that you can move around. That's been wonderful. So I think we don't have any more questions for today. What I'd like to say is a huge thank you for everyone who's attended today, and of course to Christine for presenting. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. It's great to see the solution there. So for those that are here on the live call, so thank you. And if you would like to present, share a project or a solution, a challenge, don't hesitate to reach out to me. We can find a way, whether it's through a webinar presentation like Christine has presented today, or a recorded conversation, blog, workshop, whatever suits, then we're here as SafeVet to support the share of information. But for now, huge thank you, and we will share the recording in the next 24 hours. And please do get in touch with Christine if you have further questions, and all of the details, etc., will be shared in the normal way in the recording section of Fish Tech Connect. But for now, have a wonderful, I guess for me, it's coming up to 6 o'clock. So I guess for you, have a good day, and for others, a good evening. And thank you very much.
thank you,
Bye-bye.
Ing. You're
Thank you,
wonderful.
Christine. Bye-bye.